In recent weeks, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of extremism. Because as I've been talking to voters who feel politically homeless in this moment, who hate their options for 2024, one of the things that comes through really clearly is that part of the reason that they feel this way is that they see both parties as extreme. It made me think back to this scene outside of Donald Trump's arraignment in April.
So we're here at the park that Marjorie Taylor Greene's holding a pro-Trump rally at. We see some flags.
The extreme of the extreme right was there.
One says, Trump or death? Okay.
The shadow of January 6th loomed large.
So we got like a police community affairs department kind of looking at folks coming in.
And in the midst of all that,
Good Jamaal Bowman, yeah.
I found the Democratic Congressman Jamaal Bowman.
As a member of Congress, do you ever see members of Congress do what I'm doing right now? Look what I'm doing.
At a moment when most Democrats were trying to avoid being associated with the charges, here was Bowman.
Congressman, do you have any worry about like impact on political system, no matter the truth of the charges?
Yeah.
That just like in general, indicting a former president might lead to unrest.
No, because I think justice is justice, and I think when you look at American history, it's been a history of unrest. If we didn't have an abolitionist movement, we wouldn't abolish slavery. There wasn't a civil rights movement, we wouldn't have a Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. There wasn't a suffrage movement, women wouldn't have the rights out today. So there needs to be a little bit of unrest. Hopefully it's peaceful, but there needs to be movements in America to make democracy work. Yes, sorry, let me take a picture. One second. I'll do it right now. Okay, all right.
And for Bowman, it's not just the indictment.
They're freaking cowards. They're gutless. They're not here.
Since being elected in 2020, he's helped lead a new class of congressional Democrats.
Have you ever worked in a school? It's a yes or no question. Have you ever worked in a school? You will not answer my question. Don't stop and talk to me. Okay, I'll bring it down a notch. All right, folks.
He's an unapologetic progressive, known for being not only willing, but eager to publicly clash with the other side, going beyond party leaders in the process.
Come on, invest in education. The border is what Trump left it. What are we talking about?
In doing so, he's drawn the attention of Republicans, hungry to characterize the Democrats as woke, out-of-touch radicals.
That didn't pass 3 bipartisan pieces of legislation.
You know what that's like? Are we talking about the infrastructure bill?
80-something years old.
Talking about the infrastructure bill? That's what we talking about.
And recently, he's been engaged in a kind of back and forth with GOP Congressman Byron Donalds, who himself represents a new class of Republicans willing to push their own party.
In what world? Bizarro land?
CHIPS Act.
Stop.
Infrastructure bill.
Stop.
Safer Communities
Stop.
Act. Historic investments
Stop.
in climate. $35 insulin.
High
Biden will destroy
inflation,
DeSantis.
over on southern border, fentanyl in everybody's streets. Look, we can do the same thing.
So I reached out to both of these men to ask them about what I'd been hearing from those voters. That even though the Republican Party is led by Trump, the Democratic Party is also extreme. I wanted to know, do progressives care that they're being used by the other side? And do Republicans really believe that extremism on the left is the country's biggest problem? Congressman, I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you and see you.
I started with Bowman. From the New York Times, I'm Ested Herndon. This is The Run-Up. Awesome. Thanks so much, Congressman, for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Of course, man. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you. We actually just wanted to kind of start by learning a little more about you. You're now a congressman in New York where you were born and raised, but I read that you grew up splitting time between Harlem and Yorkville. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I lived in East Harlem with my grandmother until about 7 or 8 years old. And then when she passed away, I moved to the Upper East Side, which is the Yorkville area that you're referring to. And yeah, formative experiences. I mean, you know, Central Park was not too far, Museum Mall, Museum of Natural History. You know, some days I would be right up the block in the basketball court in the park, just playing all kind of sports and games with my friends. But then I would just sometimes just walk to, you know, the Met or the Museum of Natural History, make a very small donation of like 5 cents, and just walk around by myself around the museum in awe of what I saw.
Mm-hmm. I mean, another interesting part about your backstory is you started a school in the Bronx in 2009. I'm curious what it was like to be an educator, specifically a Black educator in the Obama era. How did that shape your view of politics?
Yeah, so great question. First of all, I love being an educator. Love being a counselor and middle school principal for 10 and a half years. There were not many of us, Black male educators, Black educators in general, but specifically Black men. So, I realized very early that, my opinion and my thoughts and my voice were important to add to any conversation. And then, the Obama years were like really inspiring. I mean, I remember just having this like sense of pride, hope, and inspiration. Like, yo, this dude can win. Like, he's about to win this joint. And, when you look at our history, particularly Black history, when you see Black men, outspoken leaders, visionaries, they usually get killed, right? Like
The track
Malcolm
record of longevity is not great.
Right. So to see this person, President Obama, do what he was doing, and it looked like he was going to stay alive and not be killed, was very inspiring, and actually led to me leaning in a bit more into politics to understand a bit more about the nuances of it.
Mm. How did it shift how you viewed the relationship between yourself and politics?
Yeah, so I was political before that, but more from a curriculum standpoint. I wanted to make sure our curriculum was rooted in social action and social justice. So it was very important for me, for Black and brown kids, to learn about Black and brown history. When I was in school, I didn't learn much about my history, other than my history started when my ancestors were slaves and traded for salt and spices. But I wanted a more comprehensive history of our experience here, but also our experience back on the continent. So from a social justice perspective and curricular perspective, my curriculum that I taught and created and influenced was very political. But post-Obama, or during the Obama time, I started leaning more into like how people would talk about politics.
What do you mean?
So, watching CNN with a different ear, like how they would speak about him, how something like, his birth certificate became like an 8-year story. So stuff like how they would talk about him, but also how they talked about politics in general, particularly how it impacted my students. Like there was always this sort of undercurrent or subtext of, we can't do nothing, or not much can be done about those kids in those communities. So I started to really hear that both explicitly and implicitly from many who spoke about and wrote about politics.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there's so much controversy going around education right now, but you really hear Republicans talking about it more, trying to weaponize that issue to gin up interest for their audience. It strikes me that we actually don't hear Democrats talk about K through 12 education a lot. Was that something that you clocked at that time?
Yes, absolutely. But more so the post-Obama years, like the Trump years.
Okay.
Like, why is the narrative being controlled by Trump and the Republican Party, not just as it relates to education, but all issues? Like, they just seem to be more louder, more consistent. And even when they're wrong, they display a sort of affirmation and strength that people gravitate towards, even though they may be wrong on many of the issues. So that's when I was like, oh my God, like we're not saying enough or doing enough, and we got to say and do a lot more on this issue.
Mm-hmm. What is the moment when you say, okay, it's not just enough for me to be wondering what Democrats aren't doing about it, that I want to step up and I want to put my name in the race to actually go and challenge another Democrat, specifically Eliot Engel, and kind of act on those feelings? Why did you choose that method of getting in? Not just getting in elected to office broadly, but specifically primarying another Democrat in Congress?
Well, a year prior to me deciding to run, the Squad got into Congress and won their election. So
the Squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, the first iteration of the Squad out in 2018. Iteration.
That's right. So for me, watching that from afar, I was incredibly inspired by them. You got 4 women of color just kicking butt in Washington and speaking truth to power and creating a footprint and a space for someone like me to come in and add my voice to what they were saying. Because they were speaking using the voices of historically marginalized people and communities. And initially I was inspired by Bernie Sanders in 2016, and then 2018 was the Squad. And that's when I was like, you know what? I think there's a space for me there. And it was kind of less about Ingle and more just about like the movement and what I thought I could offer. But I did look at some data around voter turnout in the district, and voter turnout was so consistently low. I mean, I think in 2018, he won with like 20,000 votes. And I remember saying to myself, wow, like this person is making life-changing decisions for millions of people, and he's only getting 20,000 votes. Like, that's unacceptable. I could knock on 20,000 doors and beat him, and we were able to pull it off.
One of the things I hear from what you're talking about is an initial Obama inspiration that kind of transitions to maybe a Bernie Sanders or the Squad being more direct influencing figures for you to get in. That also seems like an ideological transition, maybe for someone embracing more progressive politics. Were you going on a kind of personal journey to become more lefty?
I don't know. I never looked at myself as that. I'm a Black man in America, husband and father of 3, and I'm an educator. That's how I always looked at myself. But to go even back before Obama, my politics started with KRS-One, Public Enemy, Eric B. and Rakim, and X-Clan.
You might have to translate that for some folks.
Well, I mean, I was raised by hip-hop culture during the golden age of hip-hop. And their music, their art was rooted in politics, was rooted in Black power, was rooted in knowledge of self, self-determination, being outspoken, challenging the system. That was their art. And so that art shaped me into the young man that I was and the man that I am today. So it started with that. And then, to fast forward to Obama, again, was incredibly inspirational. But I was also always very clear that, like, there was going to be some differences between some of the Obama stuff and me, right? I knew I was going to be pushing back against corporate interests. I knew I was going to be completely anti-war. I knew that I was going to be unapologetic about making sure we're fighting for reparations and investing in historically marginalized communities, specifically Black. So yeah, the journey started even before I even was thinking about running for office, when I was a kid listening to golden age of hip hop artists.
But I did read a quote from you in The Root that said, quote, "I don't think Obama is the standard. I think the Squad should be the standard we're striving toward." Is it fair to say that you, while you may have first saw hip hop leaders as an example and later Obama and then the Squad, but that these were all kind of various touch points on a journey that does lead you to, I don't know, becoming Democratic Socialist endorsed candidate? It feels to me like there is still an ideological transition or at least embrace that happened before your initial run.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always learning and growing. And so, the pathway that you're describing, hip hop to Obama to Bernie to the Squad to what I am now, it's all part of my consistent growth and evolution. I'm more of a sort of eclectic mix and amalgamation of all these things than being like labeled or rooted in a box as one thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about what happens when you first get to Washington. You had just defeated an incumbent Democrat, and I could see that causing a slightly awkward dynamic between you and your fellow Democrats on the Hill. It's not like you flipped a seat per se, right? You went after and removed one of their colleagues. How did it feel to join the Democrats in Congress, and how did they receive you?
I mean, I always felt I was received pretty well. I mean, right after we won, I was proactive in reaching out to Democratic leaders just to introduce myself and just to make clear that, I'm really here about the work. I'm not about any of the other stuff. So I think for me, my mindset was that's water under the bridge. It happened. It is what it is. And now I just want to come in and contribute in whatever.
That was your mindset. Was that their mindset?
I mean, it felt like it was. I felt like, especially, the CBC,
the Congressional Black Caucus.
Congressional Black Caucus, yes. I never felt like, marginalized by them at all. Now I don't know what was being discussed behind closed doors, but in person I never felt that way. But there was times where I took votes that were different than the party, and the party would have to fight me and push me on certain things, and that caused some friction. But again, like I remember taking one tough vote against the infrastructure bill that we were just vilified for. And Speaker Pelosi, a few months later was in my district with us. So, I think, we all have to govern based on our conscience and based on the needs of our district, and then we let the chips fall where they may.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you came in, it was also just days before January 6th, where you were quite literally and physically facing Republican extremism. How did that shape your arrival in office and your relationships with Republicans?
It was, first of all, thank God the damage wasn't more severe. It could have been horrifically worse. But to me, it was confirmation of who they are and what they're about, what America has been about for a very long time. And this is why I am here, to be responsive to that and to push back on that.
Can you explain that further? When you say what they're about and what America has been about for a long time, make that connection for me of what you're really saying.
Well, there's been a consistent infrastructure of systemic racism and discrimination against Black people in America. So to come in post-Trump, as the big lie was being pushed, and as he fanned the flames for an insurrection, and then to see it manifest is like, oh, this is America. And that's what we have to accept, that yes, what's great about America and decent about America is America, but that is also America too. And in order to have way less of that and way more of the good stuff, we have to come together differently as Americans and speak differently about what America really is.
I mean, you seem like you're saying that naming the racist kind of past that you see January 6th as a continuance of is necessary for a kind of coming together around what the future of America can be.
It's necessary for our collective healing. We all have just experienced a collective trauma as it relates to January 6th. So we have to heal from that. And part of healing is naming it.
Mm-hmm. I guess I want to push on that point, though, because one, a lot of Republicans would not name January 6th as a moment of collective trauma. And then certainly not a lot of people, I think, in the country at large would agree on the kind of racist history of America that you're naming or see January 6th as necessarily a continuance of that. How is it that your version of events of both America and that day leads to a collective healing? Because it doesn't seem like a thing that we collectively agree on as a country.
Yeah, I would argue that the majority of the country would agree with me. I don't have data to support that, polling to support that, although I think there is some polling that shows that Americans do consider January 6th an insurrection, which I can then posit as being an example of a collective trauma. But there are many of us who do think of January 6th as a collective trauma and a continuation of historical trauma, and we need to communicate that. If there are others who don't, sure, let's hear their side of the story and let's have dialogue and debate around it. But let's, at the bottom line, figure out how to create a great country that works for everyone. And right now, we're not having that conversation in a very honest and collaborative way. And that's the point of all this.
Mm-hmm. One of the ways that Republicans have gone after Democrats is by calling them the party of socialists. You do identify or have made a connection with the Democratic Socialists of America, something that has been identified with extremism on the left by Republicans. In doing so, are you feeding into that argument?
I mean, I don't know. I don't pay no attention to that. Like, I'm not.
But I'm saying, can you not pay attention to that? Republicans are using that association. But is it smart to not pay attention to that?
Yeah, but I don't. I mean, their language or narrative don't define my work and who I am and what I do. You know what I'm saying? So the people here in my district know what I'm about and know what I'm fighting for, right? Like, I'm fighting for affordable housing, lower cost utilities, childcare, education, climate. What I'm fighting for is crystal clear. If they want to label it with a name and try to weaponize it, I mean, that's on them.
Mm-hmm. I guess I want to sit with that, though, because, I was reading at an event where you're talking about how the Democratic Party has not moved left enough, that you think that is part of the reason that people have felt so disconnected to politics or felt disconnected from the party. In the last couple of weeks, we've been talking to people like No Labels, the kind of centrist group in Washington, who has made an argument that both parties have moved in extreme directions. That's why people don't feel like the system's working. I wanted to sit with your reasoning of why you think people don't feel the system's working, which is, from what I hear you say, a Democratic Party that hasn't necessarily been responsive to the needs of most Americans. Is that a correct characterization?
Yes, because the system isn't working. And it's not just the Democratic Party, it's the Republican Party as well. And the system hasn't worked for many, many years. People are struggling to live in a society where everything is driven by capital accumulation and rabid, toxic capitalism that is also plantation-based capitalism and exploitative in many ways. I mean, labor has been under attack for decades. It's harder to earn a living wage. So, it's a system that isn't working for most Americans for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And so that's a failure of both parties. And whether you call it moving left or moving closer to the people, which is what I like to refer to it as, that's what we all need to be doing so that people aren't, paying every cent they have to just simply survive.
Yeah, but is it moving closer to the people using language like collective trauma or even stuff like plantation-based capitalism? Most people do not view America as based in that type of system. Isn't the onus on you to kind of convince them of that? And has the left done that?
Yeah, I don't know if the onus is on me as an individual or us. I think us collectively have to have collective conversations, right? The point is to engage in dialogue and, share a perspective towards a collective understanding that moves us in the right direction. Mm-hmm. It's a fact.
The point is the provocative conversation.
Yeah, the point is the conversation, and not even provocative. It's to speak the truth.
Mm-hmm. But let's use the kind of biggest examples of people taking that argument to the public at large. When you say things like we haven't moved too far left, we've moved closer to the American people, how does that contend with a 2020 primary in which the Democratic Party rejected messengers like Elizabeth Warren, rejected messengers like Bernie Sanders in favor of someone like Joe Biden? That was driven through Black electorates, too. How do you contend with the argument you're making that you're closer to where people are, and specifically Black people, with the reality that's not how they voted?
Well, Bernie Sanders was outraising President Biden during that race and decided to suspend his election and support Biden because, to your point, the party, I guess, wanted him to at that time. But the people up until that point, at least from a dollars and cents perspective, were supportive of Bernie Sanders. And so, and
I'm sorry, can I cut in here?
Sure.
I guess I'm confused by that argument. You're saying because Bernie Sanders was raising more small dollar money, that the votes that we were seeing from South Carolina, from Super Tuesday, all of those were not reflective of where the Democratic Party is? I feel like votes, particularly when we're talking about low-income folks, matter a lot more than donors.
So votes absolutely matter a lot more. Dollars also do matter, especially small dollars compared to the corporate money that Biden was taking. See, and that's the other thing, too. We got corporate money versus small dollar donations. But I think as we move forward, you're going to see a continued demand from the public for us to be more engaged with them and less engaged with the corporate infrastructure that's in place. So, Bernie was part of it in 2020, even before that, and then the squad, and then us, and then more is going to be coming.
Mm-hmm. I see yourself as continuing to push that conversation. You're saying it's speaking truth to power and is really naming the kind of structural things that the Democratic Party should be talking more about.
And the Republican Party. Like, we all should be talking about it. We should all be talking about mass incarceration and police brutality. We should all be talking about the proliferation of guns and guns violence in our country. We should all be talking about our healthcare system and how to make it better. Education, all of it.
Is there anything you would see? Is there extremism in the Democratic Party? And if so, where is it?
Define extremism. What do you mean?
I'm asking you. What would you define?
I don't see.
Is there?
I not that I see. I don't see anyone in our party talking about seceding from the Union, like Marjorie Taylor Greene said, or like any of the rhetoric around civil war that I've heard from not just Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Boebert, Masson, Cawthorn, and others. I don't hear that kind of language. I hear and see people in the party, even on the so-called far left, which I guess I'm a part of, talking about making the country better and doing things to bring people together towards that, as opposed to any extreme sort of anarchist perspective on how to move forward.
I get that you don't want to draw a conflation between the far left and the far right, and I don't think those two things are the same. I guess what I'm asking you is what the right wing does is use messages from progressives, from the left, from people like you, from the squad, to gain a political advantage. They don't run against the Joe Biden that's in office. They run against the fact that Joe Biden has relationships with people like Jamaal Bowman, people who they think are easier avatars for them to run against. Even if you think you are speaking the truth to power, do you think, or should the Democratic Party think, about the ways those messages are used by the other side? Are you making their job easier?
Yeah, I think they're loud wrong on that. I think they're loud wrong. And if they want to do that, so be it. It's my job and the party's job to point out how loud wrong they are. The American people, they want to see themselves in us. And that's what they're seeing when they've seen my engagement with some of my colleagues. They see just a authentic passion that's rooted in care for people. That's who I am. So if they want to weaponize it, again, I think they're loud wrong, and we just have to call them out for being loud wrong.
We've been talking to a lot of voters for this series, and one of the things that comes up is they mimic some of those Republican messages. They talk about two parties that are extreme, and they don't mention, Democrats prioritizing guns or poverty. They say it's a Democratic Party that's become too obsessed with identity, a Democratic Party that's become too mean to the other side. That comes up on the voter level, too. Even if you think the Republicans are wrong to make those arguments, how do you combat the fact that it is affecting the party's brand that might matter in elections?
Yeah, I think they're loud wrong. If there are people who agree with that, dialogue and conversation is important to continue that dialogue and those conversations. But I think when you talk about polling, you got to poll everybody. And we don't really poll everybody when it comes to certain issues. And I like to root my work in the person who doesn't vote consistently, because there's a reason why they don't vote consistently. And I want to understand that, because another major problem in our country is voter turnout. And if we were to engage there and improve that, the country can be more responsive to the people. We have tens of millions of people who don't vote consistently in general presidential elections. That is a travesty, and that's something we need to absolutely change. So there are some people, to your point, who do take the Republican talking points that we can talk to and maybe shift some thinking there. But I think the most of our work is about talking to people who are disengaged already and pulling them into the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I mean, the last thing is that I'm also going to be talking to Congressman Byron Donalds, and you two are men with similar experiences, both growing up in New York City, both Black men. You've both talked about feeling like the government doesn't really see people like that. Why do you think that led you to such different conclusions?
I don't know, man. I can't tell you. I'm really clear that, we need to invest more in historically marginalized communities with public and private dollars. And if we did that and had truthful, honest conversations, then we could take America to another level. I just think maybe Brother Byron is putting a little too much onus on, the corporate interests and the wealthy individuals who drive our politics and our economy as them being the saviors for our country. And I just don't think they are.
In some ways, it seems like an argument between the politics of kind of what is and his arguments around that and your kind of vision of what they could be.
Yeah. Sounds about right to me, man.
Thank you so much, Congressman. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, it is really in line with, we talk to so many people who really do feel that sense of disconnect. And so I understand kind of how you're pushing the party, because for so many people I think that we both talk to, they are really sick of the Democratic Party giving them those same messages.
Yeah, and another thing I want to add, did they stop recording? Because you might want to keep this.
No, let's hear it.
No, the party's a big tent, like for real. Mm-hmm. And, while you have Jamaal Bowman, you still have Hakeem Jeffries. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important, right? Like, it's important you have to have a party that speaks to different aspects of America to pull everyone in. That's what America is.
But does the Hakeem Jeffries side see you all as equally important, right?
So I would say yes. Like, so based on this Congress and me getting myself into all this trouble, Hakeem has never called me to the principal's office to be like, yo, Jamaal, chill out. Like, that's never happened. So I think he realizes that it's going to take all of us. And again, that's America. Like, Biden's not an emperor or king. It's not a monarchy. He's one person. He's the president, which is obviously very important. But we have members of Congress, members of the House, members of the Senate. We have states, we have counties, we have cities. Like, this is about a collective consciousness and a collective narrative shift towards the country we are trying to build. And Biden in 2024 to 2028, might be the last of that old traditional status quo politics as we move towards, a new country and a new world. So I'm all for and in support of continuing the stability of Biden. Having said that, myself and others like me need to be in office and need to continue to be loud and pushing Biden and the party closer to the people and what the people are going through.
Because it kind of seems like a Joe Biden centrist pivot that might be casting you all aside for the next year and a half. Am I being too cynical?
I don't know. Let's see, man. I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong.
It does seem like he's gearing up for centrist Joe to come back in force.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised by that. And that's why I said I think, if everything goes well, he wins, we win, and then 2028, welcome to New America.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate it.
Peace and love. Thanks.
After the break, Congressman Byron Donalds.
You guys hear me?
I can.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And I can see you too. Appreciate you making some time for us. How's your day going?
It's going well, actually.
You say that it's like it's a surprise, actually.
Yeah, because I'm on Capitol Hill. You never know in this place.
Florida Congressman Byron Donalds stands out amongst most other Republicans. He's young, Black, and has already gotten behind Trump for 2024. He's about as far from Bowman politically as it gets, despite having a similar background. You're someone who grew up in Crown Heights, a predominantly Black neighborhood in New York, attended the HBCU. I don't really think of other Republicans having those type of experiences and that kind of backstory. Do you? And how does that make you unique among the Republican Party?
I mean, as an elected member, yeah, it's pretty unique because, I think typically in America, people tend to follow the political line of their family or their group or their community. And it's very rare for somebody to say, you know what, let me look at something else and decide if I want to follow that or follow this. So that part is rare. I just think that my story, I don't think is unique in terms of America. I think you have a lot of people who grew up in inner cities who have conservative leanings. Like my family is Jamaican. So in the family, we're actually very conservative, but politically, the family would vote Democrat and be registered Democrat. Mm-hmm. There's that issue in large part of the Black community, which I think like the Black community is really the conservative side of the Democrat Party. But I don't think that the personal conservatism that I think the Black community has is actually shown in votes. And there's a myriad of reasons why that is. And I want to ask about that. Well, let's start with you personally. What was your Republican origin story to connect what could have been those family conservative values to then you actually going out and identifying as a Republican? I mean, look, my mom, for her, it was about, there are no excuses. Your job is to work hard. She's like, you're a Black man growing up in this country. You got to work twice as hard. So that's how she raised me. I think politics came along through my career and through my academic leanings. So Can you be specific? Yeah, I majored in finance. So I'm a finance major coming out of college. I worked in banking. I worked in insurance and financial services. So my knowledge of the economy and how it actually works in part has drove my politics. Because really before the age of 30, I was apolitical. I didn't care about politics. Mm-hmm. I was like most people in the country. I started reading about political philosophy. So I started reading Milton Friedman. I started reading some John Locke, some Montesquieu, or really digging into macroeconomic theory, really started leaning towards the Austrian school of economics, which is F.A. Hayek and Milton Friedman and those guys. And the more I started to dig into those policy sets and really thinking through public policy, not just thinking about it, but thinking it through, that's when I realized I was actually pretty conservative. Mm-hmm. You came out of that a free market capitalist. You came out of that a Hayek guy. Oh, man, I've always been a free market capitalist because I'm a city kid. I mean, look, if you growing up in the inner city. Make that connection for me. I don't know that that's clear to me. Growing up in the inner city, everybody's hustling. Everybody's trying to get it. Everybody's trying to find a way to make money. Everybody's trying to find a way to get ahead. Everybody's trying to find out what their niche is. That's just what city life was. There was the old song, "Get Money." You had to try to find a way to get money. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not trying to get money, then what? You're just going to live in your current situation the rest of your life? That doesn't work. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I hear you, but most Black Americans don't reach the conclusion that in the kind of free market capitalist sense that leads to the conservative party. I hear what you're saying about the values being inherent in Black communities, but it's not like they make that next step like you. I mean, we're still talking about
an electorate where 90-ish% of black voters line up behind Democrats in the presidential election.
Right.
If you see this as such a natural connection between the conservative values of black people and a kind of hands-off government approach, why haven't the Republican Party been more successful in taking that message to black people? Have they tried? Have they tried in an adequate fashion?
Now, that's the real question. So I'm very critical of the party. I don't think the party's tried to really talk and engage with black voters for a long time. I think that's part of the consultant class. Like, I'm very critical of political consultants. I think that political consultants would look at it as, well, our votes are over here. So because black people tend to vote Democrats so predominantly, taking resources to try to message and communicate with black voters is a waste of time. I think that's been something in the Republican Party for 50 years, which has really been a detriment to the party. You know, so the way I look at it is my view, my role, I guess what I choose to do is take, you know, the message of conservative policies and what we're doing on Capitol Hill everywhere. That's why I'm sitting and talking to you right now. You know, that's why I go on CNN, I go on MSNBC, you know, I go on Fox, I go on Newsmax. Like I engage with everybody because I think it's important that the value system and the policy set and the political philosophy is explained to all voters, including black voters, so they can start making real decisions.
I mean, there has been in recent years a real drop off among black voters with the Democratic Party, but it's not necessarily clear to me that this version of the Republicans, to your point, is really set up to take full advantage of that. I mean,
Give me time. I would say give me time. Give me time on that one.
Where does those shifts then need to happen? Is it just you taking that message to more people, or is it the Republican Party that has to really change fundamentally who it values?
No, I don't think it's a matter. I think it's just more a matter of communicating, engaging. You know, like if I'm trying to get you to make a difference in your voting behavior, I can't ask you for the vote in September of the election year. I got to build that relationship over time. And I think that where the Republican Party's failed is not building a relationship with key pillars and people in the black community. And I feel like if they had started doing that work 50 years ago, I don't think you would have the dynamic you have right now where black voters, you know, 85% vote Democrat.
It's interesting because in a lot of ways, if you kind of ignore the party identification next to the name, your argument doesn't sound that different than Jamaal Bowman's. It does not sound that different than Stacey Abrams about the need for the Democratic Party to do a better relationship building specifically among black voters. It seems like there's an agreement across these black electeds who say that neither party is fully serving or investing in that right now. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, I think that's true. I think that, you know, the Democrat Party is taking black voters for granted. And the Republican Party has not relied or tried to get black voters to win elections. So I think both things are true.
I want to keep moving on, though, in your timeline. You get involved in the Republican Party in the Obama era with the Tea Party movement.
Yeah.
And I can see how your finance background and kind of fiscal conservatism overlap with that group's stated goals. But that was also a group really associated with anti-black rhetoric. And I'm thinking about birtherism or the claims that Obama wasn't born in America. How did you think about those messages, considering your Tea Party involvement and your desire for the party to get closer to black communities?
So I think the first thing you got to understand is that the Tea Party movement was not a monolithic movement. It wasn't a thing where the talking points came down from on high and everybody said the same thing. That actually is not true. It was happening, but it wasn't really the core of the movement.
It seems like a trade-off you've been willing to make throughout your political career as you talk about this moment. Pieces of the party that align with your philosophical beliefs,
right?
But sitting alongside other stuff that you have to accept as well, even though you're stating that you didn't love it.
I mean, I think that happens in both parties. You mean to tell me that you have a lot of black voters who are cool with transgenderism? I don't think so. Go ask a black mother about that one, see what the response is. So I think that actually happens in both parties. Both parties, you're going to have an element of your party that's wanting to do something or push something that you're like, man, I'm not really for that. I had a friend of mine who he serves elected. I don't want to say where he serves because I'm not trying to give him up, but he's an elected. He's a Democrat. And he told me straight up, he's like, man, my party is bugging because they are losing black people going down this transgenderism stuff. Told me point blank. I didn't ask him. He brought it to me. So that happens in both parties.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've been reporting on the Republican Party for the past few months, post midterms and heading into the 2024 primary. And I really saw that midterms moment as a key hinge because it seemed like for a lot of the country, they were specifically naming the Trump slate of candidates and kind of Trumpism and his political values as extreme in that election. Swing voters across the country really rejected that slate of candidates. Is that how you saw the election?
No.
As a rejection of those priorities? And if not, then what was wrong? What went wrong for the Republicans?
So I never bought into the punditry of, Trump candidates cost us the elections. I think that's lazy analysis, frankly. It was really about abortion. And I'll be straight with you. I was in Nevada and I was in Arizona campaigning for candidates before the midterms. And when you go and watch TV, because that's where campaigns put the money or in the ads, when you turn on the TV ads, it wasn't about MAGA Republicans. It was about abortion. Every ad was abortion. I remember I was in Phoenix and it's 3 weeks before the election. And the ads were abortion, abortion, abortion. Then you had the Republican ad. And then the final ad is abortion. So I think what happened in the midterms is that Democrats weaponized the abortion issue to drive young voters to the polls. And so I think that's what happened. And I think you saw a redo of that in what just happened in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin,
Yep.
The Supreme Court seat that was flipped, what was the issue? Abortion. And who went to vote? Young voters.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you're talking about transgender issues as off-putting to Black mothers, as abortion as the central issue of the midterms. I hear you talking more about these cultural grievances than I might expect, especially if from someone who came to politics specifically through the economy. It seems to mirror a Republican transition to putting those economic issues on the back burner of other grievances. Is that fair?
No, I don't think that's fair. I think, but those are things that you have to address. Do I want to talk about economics? Of course I do.
I just feel like I've heard Republicans constantly accusing Democrats of being the party of identity politics. Mm-hmm. But it feels to me like Republicans have become just as much focused on identity and culture as even Democrats. At the minimum, have y'all become what you have accused Democrats of being?
Well, I think that's because politics runs downstream from culture. It begins to dictate what your politics are going to look like. Because culture sets the baseline for views and ideas and what are the quote unquote norms. All that comes from culture. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to engage in politics and ignore culture, you do that to your own demise, politically speaking. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be successful because you're not going to understand what's on the mind and what's on the heart of the people that you're trying to represent. So you got to be engaged in culture. You got to understand culture. I think now, if you want to talk about, the focus on wokeness, I mean, can we actually acknowledge the fact that, yes, companies are far more engaged in culture than they ever have in the history of the country before? Like far mm-hmm. more engaged in culture right now.
Yeah, there's been an undeniable post-2020, I think, post-5-year push to have, corporations embrace social progressive platforms. They've been more vocal. I do think that is undeniable. That is true.
It's undeniable. But here's the thing. So if you're in a country that is divided culturally, because let's be clear, the country is divided culturally. So of course, politics is going to weigh into that. I just told you asked me about the midterm elections, and I told you that the Democrats' focus in the midterms was really abortion. And yeah, that might have been like, what's Joe Biden's slogan, fighting for the soul of America, or whatever that is. That's been the basis of their campaigns. It hasn't been economic issues. I think the issue for Republicans before is that they tried to ignore cultural issues. And what they were focused in was, we just want to talk about less taxes, less government, more freedom. And that was your basic Republican campaign. And that's changed.
I mean, in some ways, I can see how this leads to someone supporting Donald Trump in 2024, as you have. Yeah. Part of my question, coming into this was, how does an economics guy, a Black congressman, lead himself to that decision? But I hear you saying that you think that this is actually the core political battleground that has to be discussed. And I definitely can see how Donald Trump is the Republican that's expressing that most clearly. Am I getting, am I closer?
Support for 45 is really about who would be the best president for the country in the next 4 years. I mean, obviously, do I think Joe Biden is a good president? No, I do not. I actually made a comment to my colleagues earlier today that what Joe Biden actually masters in is creating crises that he can't solve. That's what he's done. Like, name the issue, it's a crisis in the country. Foreign policy, we're at a crisis point. Why? because we're involved in a proxy war, a proxy fight in Ukraine, that because if Joe Biden paid attention to the Russian troops amassing on the Ukrainian border for the 6 months prior to the invasion, we probably could have stopped this thing before it started.
But Biden is not someone who leans into kind of progressive social messages. He's someone who ran in 2020 by creating distance between himself and the progressive wing. Yeah. He's someone who has rejected cause like, defunding police or whatever you would describe the policy platforms of that wing to be. How does he fit in to this version of cultural battleground that you're describing here? It sounds like he's not the type of Democrat you're most clearly running against.
You're talking about what Joe Biden says. I'm telling you about what he does. So your actions say more to me than your words could ever say. And his actions as president have been very progressive, very progressive. Like we say it up here on Capitol Hill, staff is policy. Like you yourself as the candidate can say whatever you want. Your staff is largely going to dictate how the policy is going to come out. The staff at the White House is very left-wing, very left-wing. And so that demonstrates the policy that comes out.
You're saying no matter what Joe Biden says,
look at what he does.
There's the reality of his policy, and there's the reality that he has brought in progressives to the fold, including people like Congressman Bowman, who he sees Biden as a real ally for progressives.
Of course he does, because Joe Biden's doing everything that Jamaal wants. That's why he says that. Let me tell you, so there was a time, I think it was about a year ago, this is when the border crisis was really starting to ratchet up. And Joe Biden and the White House put out a proposal about limiting asylum applications. And the squad members were furious. He reversed course and continued doing what he was doing. So, when I talk about politics, I don't just talk about the headlines or the talking points. I bring receipts. I got my information and I know what I'm talking about. So that's how I look at it. That's what I'm telling you. You can't just look at what he says. You got to look at what he does, because what he does is very left wing.
I see you making the argument about extremism on the Democratic side, not just from Joe Biden, from a larger liberal ecosystem.
Yeah.
Do you see extremism within the Republican Party that has to be rooted out?
Define it. What do you mean?
I'm saying whatever you would see as the co-equal to Jamaal Bowman. Do you find that there is a part of the Republican Party that is pushing the party
to the right,
further away?
That's pushing the party to the right?
That's pushing the party too far to the right.
Well, I mean, are you talking about just baseline conservatism, or what are you talking about? Again, I'm trying to understand before I answer. I really want to understand.
100%. I appreciate that. I think that if you, whatever you see as equal would be my question. But if we can take an issue specifically, we can take abortion, for example.
Sure.
Has the Republican Party gone too far to the right on abortion?
I think what we've done is we've put it back to the states, and now the states are making decisions on what they want to do. Like, look, our position has always been that the Roe decision 50 years ago now was unconstitutional because the Supreme Court had no business actually deciding Roe in the first place. The court at the time wanted to do it. So are you saying that it's too much for the country per se to now have the states decide abortion in the individual states? For some voters, the answer is yes. But I think that's only because the American people have never actually had to debate the politics of abortion and actually engage in it. But the abortion politics was either you're pro-life or you're pro-choice, and that's my position, and I'm moving on. Now,
well, I can't really let you... Wait. We have to sit here because I think the Wisconsin example you gave earlier is a really helpful example here, right?
Yes.
And that state is a 50-50 DNR state, right? Where public opinion has been massively in favor of some abortion protections.
Right.
They currently have an abortion ban that dates back to the 19th century.
Right.
Because of a state legislature that will not move on the issue, regardless of what the public says. Is that an example of the Republican Party going too far to the right on abortion?
I think what's going to happen in Wisconsin is that they're going to have to figure out what the people of Wisconsin are going to want to do. So, you know what, actually, to further that point, this is what democracy actually looks like. If members are not responsive to the desires of the constituency, then they won't be members of the legislature anymore.
But that's not true. No, Wisconsin has really written those people out of all those people are going to win re-election, as you and me both know.
What do you mean that's not true? You just saw what happened with the election for the Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin. That election just happened. Okay. So in Wisconsin, every member of the legislature, or Florida, or New York, or California, they're all going to have to sit there and understand the political dynamic in their state. And so my position, the Republican position, is That's a far better place to be on abortion than just one national edict from the Supreme Court.
That is also not where the kind of Republican national groups are.
Well, those are national groups, though. And it's again,
I've seen people even push President Trump, the person you're supporting in 2024, for making the same argument around states' rights. Does the Republican Party need to tell its hardline abortion wing, its evangelical wing that has been uncompromising on this issue, that their bright lines are too far outside of the view of most voters?
Well, I think that's already starting to happen. Look, my position has been very clear. Abortion is not a federal issue. I think last year, the Democrats, they passed a bill out of the House to codify Roe v. Wade. I thought that law or that bill that the Democrats passed in the House was unconstitutional because of the Dobbs decision, that abortion is the purview of the states. So now let's go to the states. In every state, Florida's governor just signed a 6-week abortion ban with exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, human trafficking, and there's another exception. I forget the last exception. Okay. In Florida, we're going to have to see politically, how do voters respond to that? That is democracy. That's what democracy actually is. I think some people would say democracy is figuring that out before you pass the law. But the last piece I want to say is that for the groups who are on our side of the aisle politically, Republican groups, they're also going to have to understand where the politics are in the country. This happens all the time. I believe it's going to happen with abortion as well. And through that democratic process, through that political process, I think we're actually going to end up with a solution on abortion that most people can actually agree with and live with. To the specific question of why will 24 be different, because I think you're going to be 2 years removed from the Dobbs decision. And every year that moves, the emotional calculus changes. It's like, if you're a suburban woman who feels that something was taken from you, right? At that time in the midterm elections, it's clear and it's present. 2 years down the line, you're still trying to figure out why the cost of food is much higher. It becomes less of an emotional tie.
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being open to chatting with us and open to taking the questions on. And, I was actually at CPAC where you made that really explicit case around the needs to take the messages to other places. And I think as a reporter, I appreciate politicians who are willing to follow through on that. So thank you.
No problem, man. Take it easy.
So according to Donalds, the backlash to overturning Roe won't last. He thinks that the issue of abortion, which gave Democrats one of their most compelling arguments in 2022, that it's the right who's extreme, will fade in importance by 2024. This is the first time I've heard anyone make this argument. And for me, it was kind of a record scratch moment. Bringing abortion to the states definitely doesn't guarantee it fades away. It brings the issue closer to voters. And if you ask Democrats, it gives them a tool to keep arguing that Republicans are the extremists, strengthening their case that the two parties are not the same. Next week, abortion in 2024. The Run-Up is reported by me, Ested Herndon, and produced by Elisa Gutierrez, Caitlin O'Keefe, and Anna Foley. It's edited by Franny Kartoff and Lisa Tobin, with original music by Dan Powell, Marian Lozano, and Alicia Itube. It was mixed by Afim Shapiro and fact-checked by Caitlin Love. Special thanks to Paula Schumann, Sam Dolnick, Larissa Anderson, David Haufinger, Mahima Chablani, Desiree Ibaqua, Renan Borelli, Jeffrey Miranda, Sophia Landman, and Maddie Masiello. If you like the show and want to get updates on the latest episodes, follow our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, y'all.